You're listening to the Valley Current.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Jack.
Is that right? Okay. I mean, you're the tax guy who makes sure that people don't overpay their taxes in a world that continues to grow, I guess, the amount of taxes. But certainly there's a lot of people looking at ways to properly manage their tax bill. I guess that's the right way. And I discovered just today, and I didn't know this, that the entire island of Puerto Rico is one big economic opportunity zone. The entire island. That means like even beachfront property in San Juan, that's actually very valuable because it's where people want to go to resort. It has a lot of old hotels on it. So I imagine people will move a lot of capital there and engage in the game of appreciated building renovation on a long-term basis, right? That's the theory of economic opportunity zones, right?
I think so.
I mean, you know, there's a lot of old stuff in San Jose, California. There's a lot of old stuff in San Francisco, California. There's a lot of old stuff. I guess they did this on kind of a county by county basis. There's actually a map. But I just discovered today, it was weird. I was looking at something completely distinct, and I saw something that said, yeah, the entire island of Puerto Rico is one ginormous economic opportunity zone. Wow.
Well, I think that the main benefits of the opportunity zone have to do with state and local taxes, real estate taxes, county taxes, and payroll. So federal taxes aren't really involved in the opportunity zone benefits. So
no. The federal law makes it so that you can move your appreciated securities. Like if you have a big win, you actually can move the gain tax-free into an opportunity zone. And then if you follow all the rules, you essentially have this tax-free appreciation over time. And so it actually does work an advantage for federal taxes. It may work an advantage for state taxes as well. But it's, it's sort of like moving money into a fund. I mean, that's the easiest way to do it. You move money into a fund.
I'm learning something today because I was not aware of that federal benefit. I've seen a lot of benefit from a state and local standpoint, though, and also for sales tax, too. Here in California, the sales tax paid becomes a state tax credit if you're located in an opportunity zone. So there's a lot of different state and local benefits and property benefits, but I was not aware of that, what you're mentioning about federal rollover.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see, particularly as people start to look at whether or not they want to stay in a world that may not be as geographically free because of what might be this second stage variant or third stage variant. It's hard to know exactly what it is. But I get more and more calls from different clients that are saying, hey, I'm not really sure if my life is a Zoom-oriented delivery model. I could theoretically live anywhere. And I was just talking to someone today about how the US Supreme Court operates. People think that they show up at that building, that beautiful building. They operate basically on a virtual basis. They may show up at that building once a month, twice a month to hear oral arguments, maybe once a week, maybe if that, to do meetings. But everything at the US Supreme Court is managed electronically. It's like a ginormous computer system that pumps out those opinions and a staff of probably hundreds that are operating in the court, that is fundamentally like one big brain. It's actually 9 brains, and probably each of them have 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 or 8 or 9 clerks. So it's probably like 81 plus secretaries. So it's probably at least a couple hundred people, that librarians and whatnot, that are there to do.
And you have appeared before that court.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a very majestic place, and it's a very beautiful place, and it definitely symbolizes democracy and the rule of law in a big way. But the truth of how the court operates, particularly that court, but almost every appellate court, operates in the cloud or in the secure virtual system, however it's set up. I'm sure it was not the cloud years ago. It was, their own servers. Maybe it still is. But, they've got some really big decisions that they make that can move markets. So it's got to be highly secure. I'm kind of surprised it hasn't been hacked yet, given what's in the news about the Chinese hackers and the Russian hackers and the Iranian hackers and the Korean hackers. But when you really look at sort of the situation, they're managing their workflow, not the old-fashioned way from like the 1950s with people rolling around bins of paperwork and printed briefs, which used to be the way we did it. It's all electronic delivery now. So that is sort of the model of what you could argue is a professional service firm. They're arguably a professional service firm. The professional services they render are decisions, and the decisions are in writing. And there is a certain, ritual of hearing lawyers make arguments, which now, by the way, is all over the phone. That's, basically done by, it's not even done by Zoom. It's done on the phone, like literally AT&T conference line that gets recorded and in real time gets blasted out to anyone that wants to listen on C-SPAN. So, we have real live access. And I think in a way, it's sort of a statement to law firms and lawyers, and maybe to accountants. That's where I'm getting to the heart of this, which is, do you see kind of the virtualization of accounting happening over, say, the next 5 or 10 years, what we might call the roaring 2020s? Or do you think now it's going to take far longer, or maybe will never happen?
It's definitely happening to some extent, and everybody who looks at this has sampling bias.
Right.
So when I first looked at what percentage of my clients refuse to adopt these virtualization cloud-based communication protocols,
right,
I was thinking 10%.
Yes.
And those are the ones who obviously in my face just say, Steve, I'm not going to use your electronic communications.
Yeah.
On a big paper, we're going to meet, we're going to use the post office.
I'll bring a box to you. I'll bring a box. I had a client show up once with a paper bag, and he turned the whole paper bag on the conference room table. He said, this is our corporation. This is everything we ever did for the corporation. They had like 15 employees already. And he said, we need you to sort it out and figure out what we got here and what we didn't do right. And he literally turned the bag over. I'll never forget it. And, the company was successful. I mean, you can have a successful company, and there are instances where people think they've correctly filed corporate paperwork and they don't. And they operate like they're a de facto corporation when they're not. And, a lot of times they'll put together agreements that say they're a corporation, and they may no longer be a valid corporation. And technically they're like a partnership, and they don't realize they're operating like a general partnership at that point.
In general, Jack, I try not to take clients like that.
Well, he was sort of someone that I knew for many years, and I knew, he always sort of felt like the legal side could wait. In fact, there are people that debate this, and they say, if you only have a budget for one professional, should you choose a lawyer or should you choose an accountant? And interestingly, I think most lawyers say choose the accountant and most accountants say choose the lawyer. It's like, if you have a limited budget, I don't even want to touch you. Like, go to the other guy. And that's the sampling bias you're bringing up, because I think if someone came to you and said, I can only afford X dollars, how should I spend it? I've got two choices, lawyer or accountant, or maybe ideally I find a hybrid who's both a CPA and the lawyer, but that's sort of rare. Generally, people stay in their swim lanes. There are a few, but generally speaking, that's kind of a hard combo to find. But in general, I think the other profession says, go to the other guy, because I don't want to touch anything that's legal. And the lawyers say, I don't want to touch anything that's accounting. And there's lots of overlap, as we know, because people get into accounting trouble because of bad legal advice or no legal advice. And they get into legal trouble because of, mistakes that they make on things like tax withholding and everything else, right?
Jack, I am proud to say that none of my clients to date have been indicted.
That's good. That's a positive statement, right? I mean, look at the Trump family. I mean, that's a topic we've sort of batted around a little bit by email, but you can't feel anything but a lot of pain towards that CFO. Now, maybe some of it was self-inflicted, but there's a guy that's kind of like the low man on the overall totem pole. He's just, boss says jump, he says how high, and he's, doing cartwheels to do things that the boss wants. And they really want the boss, that the prosecutors really want the boss. And they're putting a lot of pressure, I'm sure, on him. And I guess he's got some indemnification rights, but they did terminate him. So he's not the CFO anymore. They probably had to do that, right? How do you have a CFO that's sort of out on bail and somehow making business decisions for you? But, it sort of like says something about when you work for a corporation, you can get yourself involved in sort of the wrong thing if you don't have a strong ethical constitution. And I have to tell you, what he's charged with, there are a lot of countries in the world that actually allow, like in London, it's very common practice in London for employers to pay the school charges for the employees' kids. Like, that's okay. Now, maybe they've changed that, but historically, that was viewed as like an executive benefit. Oh, I had to move to London for this job. My kids have to go to private school. Private school is much more expensive here. And the employer just pays for it. Now, you could argue that's income. Or
the devil is in the details. And they did it wrong. The Trump organization did it wrong. And many people and much of the media have not really read the charging documents. And
right.
What's alleged there is fraud, conspiracy, grand larceny against the federal and state and local governments.
Right.
And so it's not just a state matter. It's the word federal appears, let me see, 30 times in 24 pages of charging documents.
Wow. Okay.
And these are felony charges, fraud.
Right. It could be like 15 to 20 years, and the guy is like, guy's like in his 70s.
When they talk about the details of keeping of how things were accounted for by the organization, it's not because of some subtle detail in the fringe benefit rules. It's about proving fraud and conspiracy.
Right.
And so I think that the media has underplayed or under communicated the severity of the potential charges here. And although anything I say about this particular case has yet to be the facts, the underlying facts, have not been proven in a trial court. I mean, they've been indicted, but there hasn't been a trial court hearing. So anything is possible.
Right. I mean, the truth hopefully comes out at trial, and the pleading was certainly publicized in a way that was designed to send the message. We're of course talking about the indictment against Weisselberg. That's the gentleman.
And the Trump organization.
And the Trump organization too. And, you know, the Trump organization has to have its own separate counsel, because theoretically it can say that Weisselberg kind of screwed up and the organization was not being led correctly, I guess would be the right word. In theory, I mean, it's an interesting conflict. Weisselberg is 73 years old, so if he gets 15 plus years, that's beyond the average life expectancy of someone that's 73. And you know, it has to be pretty stressful to be under an indictment like this, right? You know, that's got to be like, wow, how do you get any sleep thinking about that? You know, spending your time wondering whether you're going to basically be in jail for the rest of your life, right?
I really feel for whoever signed their tax returns as preparer. And I think preparer penalties are a very interesting question in this case. Did the tax preparer have, so there's many potential parties to this who could end up feeling the wrath of the prosecution.
Right, but Weisselberg probably is ultimately viewed as the financial decision maker and maybe creates a firewall of some sort to protect Donald, because in theory, if he says, I made all these judgments, I pushed all this, Donald had nothing to do with it, you know, if he decides to do that to protect his boss, I guess they'll have a harder time. But it sounded like they had some evidence from Weisselberg's ex-wife that suggested that a lot of these ideas were actually ideas of Donald Trump. I don't know if that's true or not, but
you know, they really went over and beyond the pale of pushing the rules in ways that I've never seen anywhere else. So, for example, the Trump organization agreed with Weisselberg to pay a $940,000 salary, but then $400,000 of that was paid as 1099 contract fees by unrelated entities for whom Weisselberg had done no apparent work, and Trump's signature is on the text.
Right. So it's kind of a weird story.
That's pretty extreme. An employer cannot be paying an employee, a full-time employee, 1099 contract fees on the side.
Right.
That's just beyond the pale for what's allowable. So yes, you're still allowed, even here in USA, to pick up tuition and fringe benefits, room and board, as long as they are provided on the premises of the employer and for the convenience of the employer.
Oh, okay, like the hotel. Like you could argue if this guy's part of the hotel, there's a way to do it because essentially he's bound. I actually put the indictment up. They covered a lot in 25 pages. This is the people of the state of New York versus the Trump organization, Trump Payroll Corp, Alan Weisselberg, defendants. His name is last. That alone is sort of a statement in this. And, you know, it's got a lot of detail. It's got a lot of detail in it that I guess came as a result of the discovery fights they've been having, one of which went all the way up to the US Supreme Court, involving the accountants that had the records. And the scheme is laid out in these 25 pages. And you got to wonder, like, how do lawyers that do these tax fraud defenses go about thinking about winning a case like this? Because it seems so overwhelming that there was an intent just based on the way they arranged things, that how do you go about somehow suggesting that these business people that have been in business for over 50 years and can afford some of the best expertise on the market just got so many things wrong, right? This is your point about misreporting employee compensation as non-employee compensation, starting at paragraph 15, right?
Yeah, it's a statutory loser. And I think if I was a tax attorney, I would not want to take this case. This is one of those cases where you just don't want to take it.
Well, he's got some high-profile criminal white-collar defense lawyers. And of course, a lot of what those lawyers do is negotiate plea bargains. But, you know, when you have a high-profile case like this, I think it gets harder and harder for there to ever be a plea bargain, because the view is, hey, this is really dirty stuff, and it's going to look dirty if you don't bring a lot of bright light on it, including some type of trial. And I guess they could try to whittle down what are now, 15 different counts here in total? Yeah, I think it's 15 total, right? Yeah, 15 total.
I think the only way he gets off is if he turns on his boss. And
yeah, and you know, he's probably done for life once he does that. That is, he's not ever going to work for anyone that could trust him anymore. But the flip side is also true, which is if he ends up in jail, he's not going to be able to work. But maybe, you know, work is the last thing on his mind. He's trying to think of, you know, some other approach of dealing with how do you retire? I mean, imagine working 50 years. The guy's 73, so he's probably worked, you know, closer to 55 years since the age of 18. And, you know, he's probably a nice guy, probably did a pretty competent job generally, probably pushed the envelope, but I don't know whether he would have some defense that he relied on legal advice, or as you said, the tax preparer who might or might not be a lawyer, as well as being an accountant. I don't know. But to me, there's a lot more that we could talk about this case as it unfolds, but I think there's a few lessons that we can summarize. One is you definitely want to get some good tax advice and some good accounting advice when you're running a business, and some good legal advice. And, you know, those three circles have to all converge together to one unified ethical theme of what you can do versus what you can't do. So starting with like these economic opportunity zones, if a client has a big gain and they don't want to pay the capital gains, there are ways to shelter the income with an economic opportunity zone, but you got to pick the right location, the right zone, the right fund, the right projects, and they've got to be managed properly. And so, you know, you are rolling dice on whether or not that's a good outcome. I used to have a professor in law school that said, you know, there are some people that'll throw money down a black hole to save taxes, and they lose all the money.
Yeah.
And, you know, they thought they were saving taxes, but it went right down a black hole. They might as well flush the money down the toilet. They feel so strongly about saving on taxes, right?
If you're going to push the limits, you need to carefully read the rules and have a hook to hang your hat on.
But there's a lot of rules too. I mean, it's not a trivial undertaking by any means, right?
That there are, but very specifically for the two biggest items, the residence, again, it has to be provided on the premises. That's just a straightforward reading of section 119 of the tax code. The residence as provided to Weisselberg was not on the premises of the Trump organization. Then if you're going to do the tuition thing, you're limited to $5,250 a year currently, not $50,000 a year. And everybody in the organization must be allowed to participate in this benefit program. You can't discriminate in favor of the key employees.
Right.
And so there's just a statutory failure to So again, I think that if there's any traction whatsoever in this case, it's going to be over cooperation, because the prosecution will want will want Weisselberg's cooperation.
Well, people like Weisselberg, sadly, I think they do have heart attacks or they do commit suicides. I hate to even put it on the podcast, but you look at people that have detailed knowledge and they feel like they're trapped. But he probably had a lot of information about a lot of people, and in a way, you could say he just took his life as a way to sort of create a black hole, because there's like nothing. There's no. It's like that ends a lot of the investigation. I'm sure they'll dig a lot harder to find other ways to find who did what to who, but there's a lot of pretty wealthy people that are sort of hanging in the balance here, sort of waiting to figure out what actually plays out, right?
So in terms of who this really affects, I think the most affected parties are the other tax clients of the accounting professionals who prepared the returns for the Trump organization.
Yeah, this guy's name is Epstein. I'm sorry I couldn't remember it, but I just looked it up. It looks like her case was just set for trial in November, accused of procuring and grooming at least 4 girls for Epstein. And Epstein, of course, is now deceased. So it's sort of an interesting situation. New York has so many cases right now. You have to wonder, like, how the heck did that happen? Jeffrey Epstein, his alleged madam was Ghislaine Maxwell, and there's 52 documents that were unsealed. I guess this sort of goes along the same lines of these electronic files live on in many ways, far beyond what anyone can imagine, right?
I think there's even a Netflix series on Epstein.
Right. So you have to wonder, like, at what level will she see fairness in that trial, and whether, if Epstein had stayed alive, somehow he could have actually helped her, I suppose. I don't know how, but I don't know that he's helping her from the grave, but it seems like there's a lot that could flow. It's like amazing. It sort of represents to me almost the sense that Rome is burning, and while Rome is burning, whether we call it New York or Rome, there's all these like criminal cases going on to charge various people that are somehow connected with the demoralization of society at some level. I mean, it's sort of a shocking thing to look at all this stuff that's playing out and say, have we reached a point of just an amazing degradation of human decency? And is that what's playing out? Or is it more like, look, the world operates at breakneck speed and people make decisions, like driving 80, 90 miles an hour on Highway 280. They just figure, hey, there's no one else on the road, so I'm fine. It doesn't matter. The speed limit is 65 or 50.
I think we each have to look at our own practice and what we will and will not sign on to. And we can advise our clients to look at the competition and what they will and will not sign on to.
Right. That gets to the heart of the matter of what might be considered the most important point people don't realize about lawyers and accountants. They're subject to a set of ethical standards and rules, and they do have to abide by those standards and rules to stay in the profession. And so they should be counseling folks in the direction of following those ethical rules and standards, because if they don't, then they sort of become co-conspirators, and there is a crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege, and I'm sure a crime fraud exception to any accountant client privilege, although that privilege has mostly gone away from the law recognizing it. It used to historically exist, but it really doesn't exist.
It's not only the theoretical protection, but as a practical issue, when the IRS or other authorities see that the Trump Organization accountants allowed this, then they'll be foolish not to ask, what else did these accountants allow for other clients? And so everybody on that client roster is potentially subject to audit.
Right.
And whether that audit finds anything or not, the compliance costs with a detailed audit are huge.
Right. It's almost like clients don't realize it could be a big mistake going with an accountant or a lawyer that advertises that I really know how to take advantage of the IRS, because the IRS looks at those ads and pays a lot of attention to, these various schemes that some lawyers and some accountants put together to try to create some dynasty trust or something that's designed to flout one rule or another. There's a bunch of this stuff out there dealing with conservation easements and a bunch of other types of highly sensitive areas. Now, I don't know whether economic opportunity zones become a sensitive area or not. There are a lot of regulations, but it seems designed to get money to pour into areas that need some renovation, some set of construction related activities that money is not currently flowing into. So it's kind of designed to improve infrastructure, which, if anything, this collapse in Florida of this apartment building kind of proves that infrastructure is failing. Tell people how they can reach you, because you're one of the most honest and ethical accountants out there, and you'll make sure people follow all the rules and regulations while not necessarily paying an extra dime of tax. So tell people how they would reach you.
Sure. I can be reached through my website, which is www.srabin, that's S for Steve, Rabin, R-A-B as in Bravo, I-N.com. Also, www.taxservice2u, the number 2 and the letter U.com. Or my cell phone is 408-887-6433.
Yeah, I think you've got a great website. I'll put it up because you say most, and even a live chat with a beautiful woman, Amy, coming on to ask, most tax problems fixed. That's like your trademark here, if you ask me. You should have like a little TM after it. And you really do cover the waterfront, and that's the place for people to go. srabin.com, which takes you to taxservice2u.com. And I applaud the fact that you make available for people even just the general observations you've made during this various sets of podcasts we've done during the pandemic. Maybe the pandemic is over, but we're still acting in a virtual way. So we operate this podcast with a view of providing insights to people about what's going on. We'll probably keep tracking both of these cases, because I do think both of them are pretty interesting examples of New York criminal justice setting up at least a really interesting future series of movies that'll come out of both cases, I'm sure. And I'm sure we'll both remark about that in the coming months and years. So have a good evening, Steve. I look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you, Jack. Great to see you. I hope all stays well.
All right, bye-bye.
Be well.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.